Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. The Perfect Life. Marshall Gilmore had always believed in building things from the ground up. At 34, he transformed himself from a kid who grew up in Detroit's roughest neighborhood into a senior software architect with a reputation for solving impossible problems. His calloused hands, remnants of teenage summers working construction with his grandfather, now crafted elegant code that powered Fortune 500 companies. The downtown Chicago apartment he shared with his wife Ashley reflected his journey. Clean lines, minimal furniture, but every piece carefully chosen and built to last. Just like everything else in his life, Marshall approached it with methodical precision. "You're obsessing again," Ashley said from the kitchen island, not looking up from her tablet. At 29, she possessed the kind of effortless beauty that turned heads in restaurants. Blonde hair always perfectly styled, clothes that seemed to arrange themselves flatteringly around her petite frame. She worked as a marketing coordinator for a boutique firm, though Marshall had noticed she spent more time networking at industry events than at her desk. "I'm preparing," Marshall replied, adjusting his tie in the hallway mirror. Today was different. Today was North Technologies. For 3 years, Marshall had watched Grant North build his cybersecurity company from startup to industry leader. North Technologies didn't just offer jobs, they offered legacies. Their autonomous security systems protected critical infrastructure across the globe. Working there wasn't about a paycheck, it was about being part of something that mattered. "It's just another interview, Marsh," Ashley said, finally glancing up with those green eyes that had first caught his attention at a mutual friend's party 5 years ago. "Don't make it bigger than it is." Marshall studied her reflection in the mirror. They'd been married for 3 years, together for 5, and lately, he'd been noticing things. The way she deflected whenever he shared his ambitions. How she seemed more interested in her phone than his stories about breakthrough projects. The growing distance that felt like standing on opposite sides of a canyon. "This isn't just another interview, Ash. Grant North personally requested to meet with me. Do you know what that means?" She shrugged, returning to her tablet. Rich guys with God complexes love finding new people to worship them. The comment stung because it revealed how little she understood him. Marshall had never worshipped anyone. Respect was earned through competence and integrity. 2 qualities he'd recognized immediately in Grant North's public interviews and company culture. Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from his best friend and former college roommate, Craig Garrison. "Today's the day, brother. You got this. North would be an idiot not to hire you." Craig understood. As a project manager at a competing firm, he knew what North Technologies represented in their industry. He'd been the one to encourage Marshall to apply when the position first opened, spending hours helping him prepare. "I should get going," Marshall said, grabbing his portfolio from the coffee table. 3 years of his best work, organized and presented with the same meticulous attention to detail that had earned him recognition at his current job. Ashley looked up one final time. "What if you don't get it?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Marshall had asked himself the same thing, but hearing it from his wife felt different, like she expected him to fail. "Then I'll figure out the next step," he said simply. "But I'm not planning to fail." As he walked to the elevator, Marshall reflected on the path that brought him here. His grandfather, Emmanuel Gilmore, had raised him after his parents died in a car accident when he was 12. Emmanuel had been a carpenter, a man who measured success in straight lines and solid foundations. "Build it right the first time, Marshall," he used to say. "Shortcuts are just long paths to failure." Marshall had applied that philosophy to everything: his education, his career, his marriage. He'd worked 2 jobs to pay for computer science school, spent countless nights learning new programming languages, built his reputation one successful project at a time. The drive to North Technologies headquarters gave him time to center himself. This interview wasn't about desperation or ambition for its own sake. It was about finding a place where his skills could make a real difference, where he could build something lasting. As Marshall pulled into the visitor parking space, he didn't notice the black sedan that had been following him since his apartment building. Inside, Ashley Gilmore sat behind the wheel, her perfectly manicured fingers drumming against the steering wheel as she watched her husband disappear into the glass building that represented everything she'd been working to prevent. Chapter 2: Hidden Motives. Ashley Gilmore waited in her car for 30 minutes after Marshall entered the North Technologies building before making her call. "Carmen, it's me," she said when the familiar voice answered. He just went in. Carmen Horton had been Ashley's sorority sister at Northwestern and now worked as a private investigator specializing in corporate background checks. Their friendship had always been transactional. Carmen provided information. Ashley provided access to social circles that valued her appearance and charm over substance. "You sure about this?" Carmen asked. "Marshall's a good guy. Maybe the best thing that ever happened to you." Ashley stared at the glass building where her husband was probably impressing another room full of men with his earnest competence. That's exactly the problem. She'd met Marshall at a party she'd attended with her then-boyfriend, a med school student whose family owned half of Lake Forest. Marshall had been Craig's plus one, quiet and intense in the corner, discussing something technical with animated gestures. He wasn't her type, too serious, too working class, too genuine. But her med school boyfriend had cheated on her that same week, and Marshall had been there with his steady presence and complete devotion. He pursued her with the same methodical determination he applied to everything else, and she found herself swept along by the novelty of being someone's entire world. The problem was that Marshall's world kept expanding. Every success at work, every recognition, every opportunity like North Technologies, they all pulled him further from the life Ashley had envisioned for them. "He's going to get this job," Ashley said into the phone. "Grant North doesn't meet with people unless he's already decided. So let him get it. North Technologies pays well. You could quit that marketing job you hate." Ashley closed her eyes. Carmen didn't understand. Nobody understood. If Marshall takes this job, he'll disappear completely. You know what these tech guys are like when they find their calling. He already works 12-hour days on regular projects. Imagine what he'd do at his dream company. "You married him knowing who he was, Ash." "I married him thinking he'd grow out of it." The admission felt ugly in the morning sunlight. "I thought he'd realize there was more to life than code and security protocols. That he'd want to travel, to live a little, to put our relationship first for once." Instead, Marshall had only grown more passionate about his work. Their conversations increasingly revolved around his projects, his goals, his 5-year plans that never seemed to include Ashley's dreams of a different life. "What exactly did you send them?" Carmen asked. Ashley reached into her purse and pulled out a manila envelope identical to the one she'd overnight to Grant North's office 3 days ago. Inside were photos from Marshall's college years, pictures of him at parties, drunk and laughing with friends. Screenshots of old social media posts with crude jokes. A fabricated report suggesting he'd been involved in academic dishonesty. None of it was damning by itself, but together, the documents painted a picture of someone unreliable, immature, potentially dishonest. Carmen had helped her obtain Marshall's college records through questionable means, and Ashley had done the rest with photo manipulation software and carefully crafted narratives. "It's not even that bad," Ashley said, more to convince herself than Carmen. "It's just college stuff. Everyone has embarrassing photos. Everyone doesn't send their spouses embarrassing photos to potential employers. He'll find another job. Maybe something local, something with better work-life balance. This could actually be good for our marriage." Carmen was quiet for a long moment. "You know this is sabotage, right? Like, actual sabotage of your husband's career." Ashley ended the call without responding. She knew exactly what it was. Through the building's glass facade, she could see Marshall in the lobby, checking his watch and straightening his tie. He looked confident, prepared, optimistic. Everything she'd fallen for and everything she now resented. Her phone buzzed with a text from her mother. "How did Marshall's interview go? Your father and I are so excited for you both." Ashley's parents had loved Marshall from day one. Her father, a corporate lawyer who typically intimidated Ashley's boyfriends, had immediately respected Marshall's work ethic and integrity. Her mother had been charmed by his old-fashioned courtesy and obvious devotion to Ashley. They saw him as the stable, successful husband their daughter deserved. They didn't see what Ashley saw, a man so consumed by his professional identity that he'd already forgotten how to be a husband. As Ashley drove home, she tried to imagine the conversation Marshall would have with Grant North, the technical discussions that would go over her head, the shared vision for cybersecurity innovation that would light up Marshall's eyes the way she hadn't in months. She tried to feel guilty about the envelope now sitting in North's office, but mostly she felt relieved. For the first time in months, she was taking control of her own life instead of watching it disappear into her husband's ambitions. Ashley didn't know that Marshall had spent the previous evening writing her a letter he'd planned to give her after the interview. A letter explaining how the job at North Technologies would finally provide the security and stability he'd always wanted to build for them. How it would be the foundation for the family they'd talked about starting, the house they wanted to buy, the future they'd dreamed of together. The letter was in his portfolio, waiting for a celebration that would never come. Chapter 3. The Betrayal Unveiled. The North Technologies conference room overlooked Chicago's skyline, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the city Marshall had conquered through pure determination. Grant North, a silver-haired man in his 50s with sharp eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses, sat across from him with Marshall's portfolio open between them. For 45 minutes, the interview had been everything Marshall had hoped. They'd discussed Marshall's innovative approach to penetration testing, his development of autonomous threat detection systems, his vision for the future of cybersecurity. Grant's questions were probing but appreciative, the kind of technical deep dive that energized Marshall rather than intimidated him. "Your work on the Henderson Bank project is remarkable," Grant said, reviewing Marshall's case studies. "You identified vulnerabilities that 3 separate security firms missed. Pattern recognition combined with social engineering awareness," Marshall replied. "Most hackers aren't just exploiting technical weaknesses, they're exploiting human psychology. Exactly the kind of thinking we need here." Grant closed the portfolio and leaned back in his chair. For a moment, Marshall thought he saw something change in the older man's expression, a shadow crossing his face. "Marshall, I have to be honest with you. This interview has gone better than I expected." Marshall felt his heart rate increase. "I'm glad to hear that, sir. Which makes what I have to discuss next all the more difficult." Grant opened a different folder, one Marshall hadn't noticed before. Inside were photographs, college photos Marshall recognized from his Facebook account years ago, screenshots of old posts, documents that looked official but felt wrong in ways Marshall couldn't immediately identify. "3 days ago, I received a package of materials regarding your background," Grant continued, his voice careful and professional. "I want to give you an opportunity to address these concerns directly." Marshall stared at the photos, his mind racing. There was nothing scandalous in his past, nothing that should disqualify him from any position. Yet seeing his college memories arranged like evidence in a criminal case made his stomach turn. "I don't understand," Marshall said, picking up one of the photos. It showed him at a party during senior year, clearly drunk, making an exaggerated face at the camera. Harmless college stupidity, but presented without context, it looked different. "Where did you get these?" "They were submitted anonymously, along with this report." Grant handed him a typed document that detailed alleged academic dishonesty, unprofessional behavior, and character concerns. Marshall's name was on it, but he'd never seen it before in his life. "This isn't real," Marshall said, his voice steady despite the adrenaline flooding his system. "I mean, the photos are real, but this report, I've never seen this document. My academic record is clean. You can verify everything with Northwestern." Grant nodded slowly. "I already have. Your official transcripts show no academic violations. Your professors remember you as one of their most dedicated students." "Then why?" "Because someone wanted to make sure you didn't get this job." Grant's expression was grim. "Marshall, I've been in business for 20 years. I can recognize a smear campaign when I see one. The question is, who would go to this much trouble to sabotage your career?" Marshall's mind immediately went to competitors at his current job, former colleagues who might resent his success, industry rivals. The idea that someone would deliberately fabricate evidence to destroy his opportunities was staggering, but not impossible in the cutthroat world of corporate cybersecurity. "I honestly don't know," Marshall said, "but I can prove that document is fabricated. I can provide character references, work samples, anything you need." Grant was quiet for a long moment, studying Marshall's face. "Here's what I see," he said finally. "Either you're an excellent liar, or someone who cares about your personal life has decided to torpedo your professional one." Based on this interview, I'm inclined to believe the latter. What do you mean? The envelope was postmarked locally. Whoever sent this has access to your personal photos and enough information about your background to create convincing forgeries. This wasn't done by a business competitor, Marshall. This was done by someone close to you. The realization hit Marshall like a physical blow. The photos were from his private social media accounts. The personal details in the forged report were things only family or close friends would know. The timing, right before the most important interview of his career. I need to make some calls, Marshall said, his voice tight with controlled anger. I understand. Grant closed the folder and looked directly at Marshall. For what it's worth, I believe you. Your work speaks for itself, and this kind of sabotage tells me more about the person who sent it than about you. But I can't ignore it entirely. I need you to find out who did this and why. Can you do that? Yes, sir. Good. Take a week. Get to the bottom of this situation. If you can prove what I suspect, that someone in your personal life is actively sabotaging your career, then we'll move forward with an offer. But I won't hire someone whose family situation could compromise their professional effectiveness. Marshall stood and shook Grant's hand, his mind already racing through possibilities. Thank you for giving me a chance to fix this. Don't thank me yet. Proving betrayal by someone you trust, that's going to hurt more than losing any job. As Marshall walked to the elevator, Grant's words echoed in his mind. Someone close to him had done this. Someone who knew his dreams, his ambitions, his schedule. Someone who had access to his personal life and detailed knowledge of this interview. The elevator doors closed, and Marshall caught his reflection in the polished steel. For the first time in years, he didn't recognize the man looking back at him. The careful control he'd maintained his entire adult life was cracking, and underneath was something harder, more dangerous than he'd ever acknowledged. By the time he reached the parking garage, Marshall had made a decision. He was going to find out who had betrayed him, and he was going to make sure they never had the opportunity to do it again. His phone buzzed with a text from Ashley. How did it go? Can't wait to hear everything. Marshall stared at the message for a full minute before deleting it without responding. The woman who claimed to love him was asking about the interview she might have just destroyed. It was time to find out exactly who Ashley Gilmore really was. Chapter 4. The investigation begins. Marshall sat in his car in the North Technologies parking garage for 20 minutes, staring at his phone. Ashley's text glowed on the screen like an accusation. How did it go? Can't wait to hear everything. The timing was too perfect. The intimacy of the sabotage too complete. But Marshall's analytical mind demanded evidence before accusation. He'd built his career on facts, not assumptions. He drove to a coffee shop near his office instead of going home. The familiar environment of caffeine and keyboard clicks helped him think clearly. Marshall opened his laptop and began methodically examining the possibilities. First, he called his college roommate Craig. How'd it go, brother? Craig's voice was excited, expectant. Someone sent Grant North a file of compromising photos and fake documents to sabotage the interview, Marshall said without preamble. The silence on the other end stretched for several seconds. What? Who would do that? That's what I'm trying to figure out. The photos were from my private Facebook account, mostly college stuff. Did you ever save any of those old party pictures? Hell no. I barely remember half those parties, let alone save photos from them. Marsh, this is insane. Who has access to your social media? Marshall mentally cataloged the list. His wife, his mother-in-law, who was Facebook obsessed, a handful of college friends. His current colleagues weren't connected to his personal accounts. He kept strict boundaries between professional and private online presence. Craig, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest. Shoot, has Ashley ever said anything to you about my work? About me spending too much time on projects, or anything like that? Another pause. Marsh, you know I love Ashley, but yeah? Last month at Jake's birthday party, she mentioned that you've been obsessing over North Technologies. She said something about you caring more about Grant North's approval than your marriage. Marshall felt the pieces clicking into place, each revelation adding weight to a conclusion he didn't want to reach. What exactly did she say? She was drinking, probably didn't mean anything by it. But she said you'd been talking about North Technologies for months, that she felt like she was competing with your career for attention. She said, shit, I probably shouldn't repeat this. Tell me. She said she wished you cared half as much about your marriage as you did about impressing some CEO you'd never met. Marshall closed his laptop. The evidence was circumstantial but mounting. Access to photos, intimate knowledge of his ambitions, recent complaints about his priorities. But Ashley wasn't sophisticated enough to forge official documents. She would have needed help. His phone rang. "Ashley. Hey, you," she said, her voice bright with artificial cheer. "You never answered my text. How did it go?" "It was interesting," Marshall replied carefully. "Grant North is everything I thought he'd be." "That's great. So you got the job." Marshall noticed she asked about the outcome, not about his experience or what they'd discussed. "He needs to review a few things. I should know by next week." Oh, her disappointment sounded genuine, which was almost worse. "Well, I'm sure it'll work out. You want to go out to dinner tonight? Celebrate the interview at least." "Actually, I need to work late tonight. Finishing up a project." "Of course you do." The mask slipped for just a moment, irritation bleeding through her cheerful tone. "Marsh, when was the last time we had dinner together? Just us, no work talk, no phone calls." "We had dinner 2 nights ago. You had dinner while answering emails and explaining server architecture to me like I was your client instead of your wife." Marshall felt a familiar frustration. He'd been excited about a breakthrough on a particularly challenging security problem, and he'd wanted to share it with the person closest to him. Ashley had listened with the glazed expression she wore whenever he discussed work, then changed the subject to weekend plans. "I'll be home by 9, he said. "We can talk then." After ending the call, Marshall made another decision. He drove to Carmen Horton's office. He'd met Carmen several times at social gatherings with Ashley. She was a private investigator who specialized in corporate background checks, which made her exactly the kind of person who could fabricate convincing official documents. More importantly, she and Ashley had maintained their sorority friendship with the kind of intensity that suggested shared secrets. Carmen's office was in a downtown building that had seen better decades. Her name was painted on frosted glass in letters that might have been stylish in 1985. Marshall knocked and entered without waiting for permission. "Marshall Gilmore," Carmen said, looking up from her desk without surprise. "I was wondering when you'd show up." "Were you?" Marshall closed the door behind him and took the chair across from her desk. "And why's that?" Carmen was the kind of woman who cultivated toughness like armor, leather jacket, dark makeup, expression that suggested she'd seen everything humanity had to offer and wasn't impressed. But Marshall caught something in her eyes that looked like guilt. "Your wife called me this morning," Carmen said. "Said you had a rough interview. Asked if I knew anyone who could help with character references." Interesting timing. Marshall pulled out his phone and showed Carmen the photos Grant North had shared. "Someone sent these to North Technologies 3 days ago, along with fabricated academic records suggesting I was dishonest and unreliable." Carmen studied the images without touching the phone. "College photos. Looks like typical Friday night stupidity. The kind of photos someone could use to make me look unprofessional if they presented them without context. I suppose." "Carmen, I need to ask you directly. Did you help someone sabotage my interview?" She met his gaze steadily. "No." "Did Ashley ask you to help sabotage my interview?" The pause was fractional, but Marshall caught it. "No." "Then why do you look guilty?" Carmen leaned back in her chair, her tough facade cracking slightly. "Because I told her she was making a mistake." "What mistake?" "Marshall, I've known Ashley since college. She's my friend, but she's used to getting what she wants, and she doesn't always think through the consequences." "What did she want?" "For you to not get this job. She came to me last month asking about corporate background checks, how they work, what kinds of things disqualify candidates. She was worried that North Technologies would consume your life, that you'd disappear into your work completely." Marshall felt his world shifting, relationships he'd trusted revealing themselves as carefully constructed lies. "And you helped her?" "I told her it was insane, that she should talk to you about her concerns instead of sabotaging your career. I told her she was going to destroy her marriage. But you didn't stop her." Carmen's expression hardened. "I'm not Ashley's keeper, and I'm not yours either. But if you're here looking for someone to confirm that your wife betrayed you, then yeah, she did. And if you're looking for advice, here it is. Decide what you want to do about it before you go home tonight, because Ashley's going to lie to your face, and you're going to have to decide whether you can live with that." Marshall stood to leave, then turned back. "One more question. How would she have created fake academic records convincing enough to fool a CEO?" Carmen's smile was bitter. "She wouldn't have, but she knows someone who would." "Who?" Her ex-boyfriend from Northwestern, Felipe Burke. He works in academic administration now, has access to official letterhead, student records, all kinds of resources someone could use to create convincing forgeries. Marshall memorized the name. Felipe Burke. Another piece of the puzzle, another person in Ashley's life who'd been willing to betray a stranger to help her get what she wanted. As he walked back to his car, Marshall realized that discovering Ashley's betrayal wasn't the end of the story, it was the beginning. Because now he knew exactly who his wife was, and she had no idea that he knew. That gave him all the advantage he needed. Chapter 5. The Deeper Truth. Marshall spent the next 3 days conducting the most thorough investigation of his life. Not of security vulnerabilities or system weaknesses, but of the woman he'd married. What he discovered made the North Technologies sabotage look like a minor character flaw. He started with Felipe Burke. Northwestern's academic administration office was housed in a Gothic revival building that made Marshall feel like he was infiltrating a medieval fortress. He'd called ahead, claiming to be verifying his own academic records for a security clearance update, a lie, but one that got him an appointment with Felipe without raising suspicions. Felipe Burke was exactly what Marshall had expected. Soft around the middle, prematurely thinning hair, the kind of man who'd peaked in college and spent his 30s reliving those glory days. His office was cluttered with Northwestern memorabilia and photos from what appeared to be the same fraternity parties where Marshall's compromising photos had been taken. Marshall Gilmore, Felipe said, consulting his computer screen. Class of 2013, Computer Science, graduated summa cum laude. Very impressive record. Thank you. I just need official copies of my transcripts for a background check. Of course. Though I have to say, your name sounds familiar. Didn't you marry Ashley Hahn? She was a year behind us. Kappa Sigma sorority? Marshall's blood chilled. Felipe wasn't just willing to help Ashley. He was personally invested. You know Ashley? We dated for a while junior and senior year. Great girl. Actually, she called me last week asking about transcript verification processes. Said you were applying for some big job and wanted to make sure everything looked perfect. The lies were getting more elaborate. Ashley hadn't just asked for help. She'd created an entire narrative to manipulate Felipe into providing assistance. What kind of assistance did she need? Marshall asked carefully. Felipe's expression shifted slightly, the first sign that he realized he might have said too much. Just general information. How the verification process works. What kinds of red flags employers look for. Nothing specific. Felipe, I need you to be honest with me. Did Ashley ask you to create false documents using Northwestern's letterhead? I don't know what you're talking about. Marshall pulled out his phone and showed Felipe the fabricated academic misconduct report that Grant North had received. This document claims to be from Northwestern's Academic Integrity Office. It's completely false. I was never investigated for academic dishonesty. But someone with access to official letterhead and intimate knowledge of university procedures created it. Felipe studied the document, his face growing pale. Marshall, Ashley said. What did Ashley say? She said you were worried about some college stuff coming up in a background check, that you wanted to get ahead of it by explaining context. She asked me to help draft a letter explaining that certain incidents had been investigated and resolved. What incidents? I never had any incidents. The party photos, the social media posts. Ashley said you were concerned that a potential employer might misinterpret them, and you wanted an official explanation that you'd been a good student despite normal college behavior. Marshall felt sick. Ashley had manipulated Felipe by telling him a version of the truth twisted just enough to make him complicit. She'd made him believe he was helping Marshall while actually destroying his career prospects. Felipe, this document doesn't explain away college behavior. It creates the impression that I was investigated for serious academic violations. It's designed to make any employer question my integrity. The blood drained from Felipe's face as he understood what he'd been manipulated into doing. Oh God, Ashley said. She said you just wanted something official looking to include with your application materials, to get ahead of any concerns about the photos. She lied to you, just like she lied to me. Felipe sat heavily in his chair, running his hands through his thinning hair. Marshall, I'm so sorry. I thought I was helping. Ashley can be very convincing when she wants something. How convincing? Felipe looked up sharply, recognizing something dangerous in Marshall's tone. What do you mean? How far back does this go? How long has Ashley been manipulating people to get what she wants? Felipe was quiet for a long moment, clearly debating how much to reveal. Finally, he spoke. She cheated on me. Senior year, right before graduation. I found out she'd been seeing someone else for months, some medical student from a wealthy family. When I confronted her, she convinced me that it was my fault for not being ambitious enough, for not giving her the kind of life she deserved. But you still helped her sabotage my career. She called in tears, said you were obsessed with work, that this job would destroy your marriage. She made it sound like she was trying to save your relationship. Marshall stood to leave, his mind already processing this new information. Ashley's betrayal wasn't impulsive, it was part of a pattern. She'd been manipulating the people around her for years, using their emotions and loyalties as weapons to get what she wanted. Felipe, I need you to write down exactly what Ashley asked you to do, word for word. Include dates and times. Can you do that? Are you going to report me? Not if you help me fix this. That evening, Marshall returned home to find Ashley cooking dinner, a rare occurrence that immediately raised his suspicions. She was wearing the black dress he'd bought her for their anniversary, her hair styled the way he'd once told her he loved. Hey you, she said, kissing him on the cheek with practiced affection. I made your favorite. Chicken marsala, a dish she'd only prepared twice in their 3-year marriage, both times when she wanted something. Marshall sat at the table and watched her performance, noting the calculated nature of every gesture. How was your day, he asked. Good. Busy. Carmen called. She said you stopped by her office? I didn't even know you knew where she worked. Ashley's voice was light, conversational, but Marshall caught the tension underneath. She was fishing for information, trying to understand what he knew. I wanted to get her perspective on background checks, Marshall said. Since someone's been investigating me. Oh right, that thing Grant North mentioned. Any idea who might have sent those documents? Marshall studied his wife's face as she asked the question. Her expression was perfectly concerned, appropriately curious. If he hadn't already known the truth, he would have believed her completely. Actually, yes. I found out exactly who sent them. Ashley went very still, though she tried to hide it by taking a sip of wine. Really? Who would do something like that? My wife. The words hung in the air between them like a blade. Ashley's carefully constructed mask didn't slip. She was too good at this game for such an obvious tell. Instead, she laughed, the sound bright and incredulous. Marshall, that's crazy. Why would I sabotage your career? I want you to succeed. Do you? Because Felipe Burke told me exactly how you convinced him to create fake academic records. And Carmen confirmed that you've been planning this for weeks. Ashley set down her wine glass with steady hands, but Marshall caught the slight tremor in her fingers. I don't know what they told you, but they told me the truth. The question is, what are you going to tell me? For the first time in their marriage, Marshall saw Ashley's mask slip completely. The concerned wife, the supportive partner, the woman who claimed to love him. All of it fell away, revealing someone cold and calculating underneath. Fine, she said, her voice losing all warmth. You want the truth? I did it. I sent those documents to Grant North because I knew that job would be the end of us. So you decided to destroy my career instead. I decided to save our marriage. Marshall felt something break inside him, not his heart, but something deeper. The fundamental trust that had allowed him to build a life with another person. Our marriage was never in danger, Ashley. But it is now. Ashley stood up from the table, her posture shifting into something more aggressive. You have no idea what it's like being married to someone who cares more about their work than their spouse. You live for those projects, Marshall. You come alive when you talk about security protocols and threat assessments, but you look bored when I try to talk about my day. Because your day consists of shopping and gossip and avoiding any real responsibility. There it is. Ashley's smile was sharp, triumphant. Finally, some honesty. You think I'm shallow. You think my work doesn't matter. You think I'm just some accessory to your perfect professional life. I think you're someone who destroys other people's dreams when they interfere with what you want. And I think you're someone who forgot he had a wife the moment you decided to become the next great cybersecurity genius. Marshall looked at the woman he'd married. Really looked at her, maybe for the first time. Beautiful, charming, skilled at reading people and giving them exactly what they wanted. But underneath all of that, someone capable of breathtaking betrayal without a trace of genuine remorse. Pack a bag, he said quietly. What? Pack a bag and stay somewhere else tonight. I need time to think. Marshall, we can work through this. Couples therapy, communication exercises, whatever you want. I know I made a mistake, but you didn't make a mistake, Ashley. You made a choice. You chose to betray me, and now I'm choosing how to respond. Ashley stared at him for a long moment, and Marshall saw her calculating whether tears or anger would be more effective. Finally, she chose defiance. Fine, but when you realize that job would have destroyed us anyway, don't come crying to me. As Marshall watched his wife pack her things, he realized that Ashley had given him an unexpected gift. She'd shown him exactly who she was, and now he was free to show her who he could become. Chapter 6. The plan takes shape. Marshall spent his first night alone in 3 years methodically documenting everything he discovered about Ashley's betrayal. By dawn, he had a comprehensive file that included Felipe Burke's written confession, Carmen Horton's reluctant testimony, and a detailed timeline of Ashley's deception. But evidence of her betrayal wasn't enough. Marshall wanted justice, and he wanted it to be thorough. He called Grant North at 7 a.m. Marshall, Grant's voice was crisp, professional. I wasn't expecting to hear from you so soon. I found out who sabotaged the interview. It was my wife. The silence on the other end stretched for nearly 30 seconds. Your wife? Christ, Marshall, I'm sorry. That's not something I've encountered before. I have proof. Written confessions from the people she manipulated, documentation of how she orchestrated the whole thing. I can have everything to you by this afternoon. Send me what you have. But Marshall, I need to ask, what's your situation now? Domestically? She's moved out temporarily. I'm considering divorce proceedings. Good. I know that sounds cold, but a spouse actively sabotaging your career isn't just a personal problem. It's a security risk. If I hire you and she decides to target North Technologies directly, that becomes my problem too. Grant was right, though Marshall hadn't considered the broader implications. Ashley knew his work methods, his security protocols, his professional connections. In the wrong hands, that information could be weaponized. I understand. Give me a week to resolve this completely. How completely? Marshall paused, choosing his words carefully. Completely enough that she'll never be in a position to interfere with anyone's career again. After ending the call, Marshall made a list of everyone who'd been complicit in Ashley's deception. Felipe Burke, who'd created false documents. Carmen Horton, who'd provided guidance while claiming neutrality. And Ashley herself, who'd orchestrated everything. But as Marshall considered his options for revenge, he realized that simply exposing Ashley's betrayal wouldn't be sufficient. She'd shown him that she was willing to destroy other people to get what she wanted. That kind of person didn't learn from consequences, they just got better at avoiding them. Marshall needed to ensure that Ashley faced consequences that would fundamentally change her ability to manipulate others. He started by calling his lawyer, Scott Paul, a sharp-eyed family attorney who'd handled Marshall's real estate purchases and business contracts. Scott had always struck Marshall as the kind of lawyer who enjoyed complicated problems. Marshall, good to hear from you. What can I do for you? I need to discuss divorce proceedings. But it's complicated. They always are. How complicated? Marshall explained Ashley's sabotage in clinical detail, providing times, dates, and evidence. Scott listened without interruption, occasionally making notes. This is career sabotage, Scott said when Marshall finished. Potentially prosecutable as interference with business relations, depending on how aggressive we want to get. But from a divorce perspective, it's also evidence of marital misconduct that could affect asset distribution. What do you mean? Illinois is a no-fault divorce state, but marital misconduct can still influence property division if it relates to the dissolution of the marriage or dissipation of marital assets. Ashley's sabotage directly undermines your earning capacity, which affects the marital estate. Marshall hadn't considered the financial implications. The North Technologies position would have nearly doubled his salary. Ashley's betrayal hadn't just cost him a job. It had cost him years of potential earnings. I want to file for divorce immediately, Marshall said. But I also want to file a civil suit for intentional interference with business relations. That's aggressive and expensive. I have evidence, and I want to make sure this never happens again, to me or to anyone else. Scott was quiet for a moment. Marshall, I need to ask. Are you looking for justice, or are you looking for revenge? What's the difference? Justice is proportionate. Revenge is comprehensive. Marshall thought about Ashley's cold smile when she'd finally admitted to sabotaging his career. The way she tried to manipulate him even after being caught. The years of subtle undermining he was only now beginning to recognize. Both, he said finally. In that case, I have some ideas. But first, I need you to do something for me. What? Go home and make sure Ashley hasn't taken anything that doesn't belong to her. Document everything. Take photos. I have a feeling this is going to get complicated. Marshall returned to his apartment to find that Ashley had been thorough in her temporary departure. She'd taken clothes, jewelry, personal items, and several things that definitely didn't belong to her. His laptop was gone, along with external hard drives containing years of work projects. Bank statements, tax documents, and financial records had been cleaned out of his home office. She'd also taken his grandfather's watch, a vintage Omega that Emmanuel Gilmore had given Marshall on his 18th birthday. Marshall photographed everything, cataloging each missing item with the methodical precision he'd learned from crime scene analysis. By the time he finished, he had evidence of theft to add to the interference charges. But as he worked, Marshall realized that Ashley had made a critical error. She'd taken his work laptop, which meant she now possessed proprietary information belonging to his current employer. That wasn't just theft, it was corporate espionage. Marshall called his boss at his current cybersecurity firm. Rich, it's Marshall. I need to report a security breach. Rich Dillon had been Marshall's supervisor for 2 years, and he understood the implications immediately. What kind of breach? Personal. My wife has taken my work laptop and external drives containing client data. I need to report it officially and discuss security protocols. Jesus, Marshall. How much data are we talking about? 3 years of penetration testing reports, client system analyses, and security protocols for approximately 40 companies. The silence on the other end was ominous. Rich was calculating the potential liability, the damage to client relationships, the regulatory implications. We need to meet immediately. And Marshall? This changes your situation significantly. If your wife is attempting to leverage proprietary client data, we're talking about federal crimes. As Marshall drove to his office, he realized that Ashley had just escalated their conflict beyond personal revenge into something much more serious. She'd gone from sabotaging his career to committing federal crimes. And unlike Ashley, Marshall knew exactly how to document, investigate, and prosecute federal crimes. By the end of the week, Ashley would discover that destroying Marshall's dream job had been the biggest mistake of her life. Chapter 7. The Net Closes. Ashley felt confident as she sat in the downtown coffee shop waiting for her meeting with Jake Small, a technology reporter from the Chicago Tribune. She'd spent 3 days crafting the perfect narrative, a story about corporate corruption and abuse of power that would make Marshall look like a victim while positioning her as the brave whistleblower. The stolen laptop and hard drives were in her oversized purse, containing what she believed was her insurance policy. If Marshall wanted to play hardball with divorce proceedings, she'd show him what real hardball looked like. Ashley Gilmore. Jake was younger than she'd expected, probably fresh out of journalism school, with the eager expression of someone hungry for his first big story. Thank you for meeting with me, Ashley said, settling into her carefully chosen persona of reluctant informant. What I'm about to share could be dangerous for me personally, but I think the public has a right to know. Jake pulled out a digital recorder and notebook, his eyes bright with anticipation. Take me through it from the beginning. Ashley had rehearsed this story for hours. She painted Marshall as an obsessive cybersecurity specialist who'd been using his position to access confidential client information for personal gain. She claimed he'd been planning to sell proprietary security data to competitors, and that she'd only discovered his scheme when he became desperate to land the North Technologies job. He was stealing from his own clients, Ashley said, allowing her voice to tremble with the right amount of emotion. When I confronted him about it, he became violent. I was afraid for my safety, so I took evidence of his crimes and left. What kind of evidence? Jake asked, leaning forward. Ashley patted her purse. Client files, security assessments, proprietary algorithms. Everything needed to prove that he's been running a corporate espionage operation. Jake's pen moved rapidly across his notebook. Have you taken this to the police? I'm afraid to. My husband has connections in law enforcement through his security work. I think they might cover for him. It was a beautiful story, Ashley thought. It cast her as the victim while making Marshall look like both a criminal and a threat. Even if the allegations didn't stick, The mere publication of such accusations would destroy his reputation permanently. Ms. Gilmore, I need to verify some of these claims before publication. Can you provide me with copies of the documents you mentioned? Of course. Ashley reached into her purse, then froze. Standing across the coffee shop, watching her through the window, was Marshall. He wasn't alone. Two men in dark suits flanked him, FBI agents, based on their posture and professional alertness. Ashley's blood turned to ice as she realized what was happening. Marshall had somehow anticipated her plan and turned it against her. Her phone buzzed with a text from Marshall. Check your email. Now, with trembling fingers, Ashley opened her email to find a message with multiple attachments. The subject line read, Evidence Package, Ashley Hahn Gilmore. The attachments included Felipe Burke's written confession detailing how Ashley had manipulated him into creating false documents. Carmen Horton's statement about Ashley's premeditated sabotage. Bank records showing Ashley had accessed Marshall's accounts to fund her schemes. Security footage from Northwestern's administration building showing Ashley meeting with Felipe. But the final attachment was the most damaging. A complete digital forensics report of Marshall's stolen laptop, showing that Ashley had attempted to copy sensitive client files and had researched the market value of proprietary security algorithms. The email concluded with a simple message, turn around. Ashley looked up to see Marshall entering the coffee shop with his FBI escorts. Jake Small had disappeared, apparently recognizing law enforcement when he saw it. Ashley Hahn Gilmore, one of the FBI agents, said, approaching her table. You're under arrest for theft of proprietary information, corporate espionage, and conspiracy to commit wire fraud. This is insane, Ashley said, but her voice lacked conviction. I was trying to expose crimes, not commit them. Ma'am, you're in possession of stolen corporate data belonging to multiple companies. Your digital footprint shows you attempted to access and copy sensitive client files. That constitutes federal crimes regardless of your stated intentions. As the agent read Ashley her rights, Marshall approached her table. He looked different, harder, more focused, completely in control of the situation. You made two critical mistakes, Marshall said quietly. First, you underestimated how thoroughly I document everything. Second, you assumed I wouldn't be willing to destroy you as completely as you tried to destroy me. Marshall, please. We can work this out. I'll give everything back. I'll admit I made a mistake. It's too late for that. You crossed a line when you stole proprietary client data that endangered innocent companies and their employees. This isn't about our marriage anymore. It's about national security. The FBI agents escorted Ashley out of the coffee shop in handcuffs. As they passed the window, Marshall saw her looking back at him with an expression of absolute shock. She'd finally encountered someone who played the manipulation game better than she did. Marshall's phone buzzed with a call from Scott Paul. It's done, Marshall said, answering. Good. The divorce papers were served an hour ago. Given the federal charges, I don't anticipate much resistance on asset division. How do you feel? Marshall watched the FBI car disappear into Chicago traffic, carrying away the woman who'd nearly destroyed his career and had instead destroyed her own life. Like I can finally move forward. As Marshall walked back to his office, he thought about his grandfather's advice. Build it right the first time. Marshall had built his career right, his reputation right, his evidence right. Ashley had built her schemes on lies and manipulation, and they'd collapsed the moment they encountered someone who built things to last. Grant North called as Marshall reached his building. I saw the news about your wife's arrest. Federal charges, corporate espionage, and theft of proprietary information. She tried to sell client data to competitors. Christ. Marshall, I'm sorry you had to go through this, but I'm impressed with how you handled it. Most people would have let emotion cloud their judgment. I learned a long time ago that emotion without strategy is just noise. Well, your strategy was flawless. The job offer stands, assuming you're ready to start fresh. Marshall looked up at the sky, clear and blue above the Chicago skyline. For the first time in weeks, he felt like he could breathe freely. When do I start? Chapter 8, New Foundations. 3 months later, Marshall stood in Grant North's office, reviewing the quarterly security assessment for their largest client. The work was everything he'd hoped it would be, complex, meaningful, and surrounded by colleagues who shared his passion for excellence. Outstanding work on the Henderson Industries project, Grant said, closing the report Marshall had submitted. You've identified vulnerabilities that could have cost them millions. Thank you, sir. The team made it possible. The team executed your vision. There's a difference. Marshall had thrown himself into his new role with characteristic intensity, but this time it felt different. At his previous job, he'd been talented but constrained by corporate politics and limited resources. At North Technologies, he was free to pursue innovative solutions with the full support of leadership. His phone buzzed with a text from Craig. Dinner tonight? There's someone I want you to meet. Marshall smiled. Craig had been trying to set him up on dates since Ashley's arrest, convinced that Marshall needed to get back out there. Marshall appreciated the concern, but he wasn't ready for another relationship. He was still learning to trust his own judgment about people. Actually, there's something else I wanted to discuss, Grant continued. I've been thinking about expansion. Opening a West Coast office, maybe bringing in some government contracts. I'd want you to head up the new division. The offer was exactly the kind of opportunity Marshall had dreamed about. More responsibility, cutting-edge projects, the chance to build something from the ground up. 6 months ago, he would have accepted immediately. That's an incredible opportunity, Marshall said. Can I think about it? Grant raised an eyebrow. The old Marshall Gilmore would have said yes before I finished the sentence. The old Marshall Gilmore made some assumptions about what other people wanted that turned out to be catastrophically wrong. Fair point. Take your time. But Marshall, don't let Ashley's betrayal make you afraid of taking risks. She was the risk. The work is just the work. That evening, Marshall met Craig at their usual restaurant, a small Italian place near Marshall's apartment. Craig was already seated at their regular table, and he wasn't alone. Marshall, I want you to meet Dawn Bennett, Craig said, standing as Marshall approached. Dawn, this is the friend I've been telling you about. Dawn Bennett was nothing like Ashley. Where Ashley had been carefully polished and conventionally beautiful, Dawn was natural and understated. She wore minimal makeup, her brown hair was pulled back in a simple ponytail, and she was dressed in jeans and a sweater that suggested she valued comfort over impression. Craig's told me a lot about you, Dawn said, shaking Marshall's hand with a firm grip. He says you're the best cybersecurity specialist in Chicago. Craig exaggerates. But I'm good at my job. He also says you recently went through a difficult divorce. Marshall glanced at Craig, who shrugged apologetically. I believe in full disclosure, Craig said. I appreciate honesty, Marshall replied, sitting down across from Dawn. It's been in short supply in my life lately. Dawn smiled. Craig mentioned that too. He said your ex-wife tried to sabotage your career. She succeeded, temporarily, but it worked out better than the alternative. How so? Marshall considered how to explain the past few months without sounding bitter or angry. I learned some important things about myself. About what I want from relationships, about how I evaluate people, about the difference between someone supporting your dreams and someone tolerating them. That's a valuable education, even if it was expensive. Marshall found himself studying Dawn's face as she spoke. She had the kind of direct gaze that suggested she wasn't performing or calculating. She was just present, engaged, genuinely curious about his answer. What about you? Marshall asked. What do you do? I'm a trauma surgeon at Northwestern Memorial, so I have some experience with high-stress situations and complicated people. Craig grinned. Dawn's being modest. She's one of the youngest department heads in the hospital's history. Craig's being dramatic, Dawn replied. I just work hard and try not to let ego interfere with patient care. Marshall felt something he hadn't experienced in months. Genuine interest in getting to know someone better. Not because they were attractive or charming, but because they seemed like the kind of person who understood the value of competence and integrity. What kind of trauma surgery? Marshall asked. Emergency cases, mostly. Car accidents, workplace injuries, violence-related trauma. People at their worst moments, needing someone to help them survive long enough to get better. That must be incredibly demanding. It is. But it's also incredibly rewarding when you can save someone who might not have made it otherwise. Marshall noticed that Dawn talked about her work the way he talked about his, with passionate engagement rather than obligatory professionalism. She cared about what she did, not just how it looked to other people. How long have you been in trauma surgery? Marshall asked. 8 years. I did my residency here, then stayed on staff. Chicago is a good city for trauma surgery, unfortunately. Dawn grew up here too, Craig added. South Side. Worked her way through college and medical school. Marshall caught the subtext in Craig's comment. Dawn had built her career through merit and determination, not connections or advantages. She understood what it meant to earn success rather than expect it. As dinner progressed, Marshall found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in years. Dawn was intelligent without being competitive, successful without being arrogant, engaging without performing. She asked thoughtful questions about his work and shared stories from the hospital that revealed both her competence and her humanity. "I should probably mention," Dawn said as they finished dessert, "Craig told me about your situation with your ex-wife. The sabotage, the arrest, all of it." Marshall tensed slightly. And I think you handled it exactly right. Someone betrays your trust that completely, you document everything and let the legal system sort it out. No drama, no revenge fantasy, just consequences. Some people think I was too harsh. Some people have never had their careers sabotaged by someone who claimed to love them, Dawn replied. You protected yourself and made sure she couldn't do the same thing to someone else. That's not harsh, that's responsible. Marshall felt something shift in his chest, a loosening of tension he'd been carrying for months. Dawn understood not just what Ashley had done, but why Marshall's response had been necessary. Would you like to have coffee sometime? Marshall asked, surprising himself with the spontaneity of the question. Dawn smiled. I'd like that. But I should warn you. I work weird hours. I'm terrible at returning texts promptly, and I have strong opinions about almost everything. I work long hours. I overthink most decisions, and I've recently learned that my judgment about people needs some calibration. Sounds like we're both honest about our limitations. It's a start. As Marshall walked home that night, he thought about Grant's job offer and Dawn's direct way of engaging with the world. For the first time since Ashley's betrayal, he felt like he could see a future that was built on solid foundations rather than assumptions and hope. He pulled out his phone and sent Grant a text. I'd like to discuss the West Coast position. When can we talk? Then he sent another text to Dawn. Thank you for dinner. How's Saturday afternoon for coffee? The responses came quickly. Grant wrote back, my office, 9 a.m. tomorrow. Dawn replied, Saturday works. I know a place that makes excellent coffee and doesn't play music loud enough to drown out conversation. Marshall smiled as he climbed the stairs to his apartment. He was finally ready to start building again. Chapter 9. Earned Victory. 1 year later, Marshall stood on the roof deck of North Technology's new San Francisco office, watching the sunset paint the bay in shades of gold and crimson. The view was spectacular, but what satisfied him more was the knowledge that he'd earned every moment of it. The West Coast division had exceeded all projections in its first year of operation. Marshall's team had secured contracts with 3 major tech companies, developed innovative security protocols that were setting industry standards, and established North Technologies as a premier cybersecurity firm on both coasts. The quarterly reports look incredible, Grant said, joining Marshall at the railing. Client satisfaction scores are the highest we've ever recorded. The team makes it possible, Marshall replied, though he felt a quiet pride in what they'd accomplished together. Marshall, I've been in business for 25 years, and I've never seen someone build a division this successfully this quickly. You've earned something I don't give out lightly. Grant handed Marshall an envelope. Inside was a contract amendment making Marshall a partner in North Technologies, along with an equity stake that would set him up financially for the rest of his life. Partnership, Marshall said, reading the terms. Grant, this is extraordinary. You've earned extraordinary results. But more than that, you've shown the kind of character I want associated with this company permanently. The way you handled your personal situation last year, that showed me everything I needed to know about your integrity. Marshall thought about Ashley, now serving an 18-month federal sentence for corporate espionage. The divorce had been finalized 6 months ago, with Ashley receiving minimal assets due to her criminal conviction and the prenuptial agreement she'd forgotten she'd signed. She'd written him several letters from prison, alternately apologetic and accusatory, but Marshall had returned them unopened. Some chapters of life needed to stay closed. There's something else, Grant continued. I've been approached by the Department of Homeland Security about a cybersecurity initiative. They want North Technologies to lead a task force on critical infrastructure protection. It would be a 5-year contract, significant government work. That's incredible. What would you need from me? I need you to head the entire operation. Move back to Chicago, recruit the best people in the industry, build something that could protect the country's most vital systems. Marshall felt the familiar thrill of a meaningful challenge, but this time he also considered the personal implications. Moving back to Chicago would mean being closer to the life he'd built there, to the people who mattered to him. "I'd want Dawn to be part of the decision," Marshall said. Grant smiled. "I was hoping you'd say that. Bring her out here next week. Let her see what we're building, what this could mean for both of you." Marshall's phone buzzed with a text from Dawn. "Surgery went well. Patient stable. How's the sunset?" He replied with a photo of the San Francisco skyline and the message, "Beautiful, but not as good as Chicago sunsets." Dawn's response was immediate. "Smooth talker. See you tomorrow night." Marshall was flying back to Chicago the next morning for what had become a monthly ritual. Dinner with Dawn, coffee with Craig, a quiet weekend reconnecting with the city and people he cared about. The relationship with Dawn had developed slowly, carefully, built on mutual respect rather than passion or convenience. She understood his work demands because hers were equally intense. She appreciated his methodical approach to problems because she'd seen how lives could be saved or lost based on careful preparation and sound judgment. More importantly, Dawn had helped Marshall learn to trust his instincts about people again. She'd been patient while he worked through the lingering effects of Ashley's betrayal, and she'd celebrated his successes without trying to claim credit for them. "Are you happy?" Grant asked, watching Marshall text with Dawn. "Yes," Marshall said, realizing it was the first time in years he could answer that question without qualification. "I'm building something worth building with people who deserve my best work. That's all any of us can ask for." As Marshall prepared to leave the office, his phone rang with a call from Felipe Burke. "Marshall, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Northwestern's alumni directory." "Felipe, how are you?" "Better. I wanted to thank you for not pressing charges last year. I know you could have destroyed my career, and you chose not to." After Ashley's arrest, Marshall had decided that Felipe's punishment, losing his position at Northwestern and struggling to find work in academic administration, was sufficient consequence for his role in the sabotage. Unlike Ashley, Felipe had been manipulated rather than malicious. "You were honest about what happened," Marshall said. "That mattered. I've been thinking about what Ashley did to both of us, how she used our feelings against us. I wanted to ask, how did you get past the anger?" Marshall considered the question carefully. "I realized that staying angry was just another way of letting her control my life. The best revenge was building something better than what she tried to destroy." "Have you built something better?" Marshall looked around his office, thought about the team he'd assembled, the meaningful work they were doing, the relationship with Dawn that was based on honesty and mutual respect rather than manipulation and need. "Yes," he said, "I have." After ending the call, Marshall packed up his files and prepared for the flight home. In his briefcase was the partnership contract that represented everything he'd worked toward professionally. In his phone were text messages from a woman who supported his ambitions while pursuing her own with equal dedication. But what satisfied him most was the knowledge that he'd faced betrayal without becoming bitter, injustice without compromising his principles, and loss without losing sight of what mattered most. As the plane lifted off from San Francisco, Marshall thought about his grandfather's advice: build it right the first time. He'd finally learned to apply that wisdom not just to his career, but to every aspect of his life. He was building it right this time, and it was going to last. And there you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there. Welcome back to another story on Infidelity Tales Lab. Before we begin, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Now, let's dive into today's story. Chapter 1. Crimson Revelations. The kitchen knife clattered to the marble floor, painting droplets of crimson across the pristine white tiles. Malcolm Hicks stood frozen in the doorway, his briefcase slipping from nerveless fingers as he took in the scene before him. His 17-year-old son Dylan pressed a bloody dishcloth against his shoulder, tears streaming down his face. His wife Cassandra stood across the kitchen island, her perfectly manicured hands still trembling, her designer blouse splattered with evidence of what she'd done. "My wife stabbed our son with a kitchen knife during an argument," Blood was everywhere. The words formed in Malcolm's mind, but never reached his lips. The sight rendered him speechless. Dylan looked up at his father with pleading eyes. "Dad, I need—" "It's just a scratch," Cassandra interrupted, her voice sharp and defensive. He was being disrespectful, threatening me. I had to defend myself. Malcolm's hand instinctively reached for his phone, but before he could dial, his father Robert Hicks materialized beside him, snatching the device with surprising speed for a 70-year-old man. When I tried to call the hospital, Dad took my phone. "It's just a scratch. Don't overreact." Robert's voice boomed through the kitchen, dismissive and controlling as always. May Hicks, Malcolm's mother, emerged from the living room where she'd apparently been watching the entire drama unfold. "Your wife was defending herself. He must have provoked her," she declared, her loyalties clearly aligned with Cassandra, as they had been for the past 15 years of Malcolm's marriage. Malcolm's steel-gray eyes moved methodically from his bleeding son to his unrepentant wife, then to his parents who seemed more concerned with protecting Cassandra than their own grandson. In that moment, something fundamental shifted inside him. The successful architect who'd built his life on precision and careful planning began constructing something entirely different in his mind. They had no idea what I would do next, but Malcolm did. He'd always been a man who thought 10 moves ahead, who could envision the completed building before laying the first brick. Now, as he watched his family reveal their true nature, he began blueprinting something far more intricate than any structure he'd ever designed. "Dylan," Malcolm said quietly, his voice carrying an edge his son had never heard before. "Let me see that wound." He gently moved the dishcloth aside, revealing a 3-inch gash that would definitely need stitches. It was deep enough to scar, deep enough to have been dangerous if it had hit an artery. "We're going to the hospital," Malcolm announced, his tone brooking no argument. "Malcolm, you're overreacting," Cassandra said, but there was something in her husband's eyes that made her take a step back. "Am I?" Malcolm retrieved his phone from his father's grip with a swift motion that left Robert stumbling. "Because what I see is my wife attacking my son with a deadly weapon while my parents cover for her. What I see is a family that has revealed their true priorities." As Malcolm helped Dylan toward the door, he caught sight of his reflection in the hallway mirror. The man staring back at him looked the same. Dark hair slightly graying at the temples, broad shoulders, the kind of face that inspired confidence in clients and respect from colleagues. But behind those gray eyes, something had awakened. Something cold and calculating and utterly merciless. Malcolm Hicks had built his reputation on never leaving a project unfinished. This would be no exception. Chapter 2. Architects of Deception. 3 hours later, Malcolm sat in the hospital waiting room as Dylan received 12 stitches and a tetanus shot. The doctors had asked uncomfortable questions about how the injury occurred, their suspicious glances making it clear they'd seen domestic violence before. Malcolm had answered truthfully. His wife had stabbed his son during an argument. The paperwork would create a paper trail, though he doubted Cassandra realized that yet. Malcolm's mind drifted to the past as he waited. He'd met Cassandra Curry at a charity gala 15 years ago, drawn to her striking beauty and seemingly gentle nature. She'd been working as an interior designer then, struggling to establish herself in Denver's competitive market. Malcolm, already a successful architect at 35, had been charmed by her vulnerability and determination. Their courtship had been a whirlwind of romantic dinners and weekend getaways. Cassandra had seemed to fit perfectly into his vision of the future, intelligent, beautiful, and appreciative of the lifestyle his success could provide. They'd married within a year, and Dylan had followed 2 years later. But red flags had appeared early, though Malcolm had chosen to ignore them. Cassandra's temper, her manipulative behavior toward his parents, who'd inexplicably adored her from the start, her expensive taste that seemed to grow more extravagant each year. She'd gradually stopped working, claiming she needed to focus on being a wife and mother, though Malcolm had noticed she spent more time at the spa than with Dylan. Then there were the unexplained absences, the new clothes and jewelry she claimed were gifts from friends, the way she'd started guarding her phone like a state secret. Malcolm had suspected for months, but he'd been too focused on his work, too trusting of the woman he'd built his life around. Mr. Hicks, Dr. Patricia Williams approached, pulling him from his thoughts. Dylan's doing well. The wound was clean, and we've given him antibiotics as a precaution. However, I need to ask, this type of injury in a domestic setting? You're wondering if my wife is dangerous, Malcolm said quietly. The answer is yes, but not in the way you think. Dr. Williams studied his face. Are you safe at home, Mr. Hicks? Is Dylan? Malcolm considered the question. Physical safety? Probably. But emotional safety, financial security, the integrity of everything he'd built, that was already gone. We will be, he said finally. Thank you for taking care of my son. On the drive home, Dylan finally spoke. Dad, I wasn't threatening her. I asked her why she was always on the phone, why she's never here anymore. She just exploded. Malcolm's hands tightened on the steering wheel. What did you see, Dylan? On her phone. Text messages. Lots of them. From someone named Wesley. She was laughing at things he said, Dad. The way she used to laugh with you. Wesley. Malcolm filed the name away, another piece of the puzzle clicking into place. He'd heard Cassandra mention a Wesley Lucas, a contractor she'd supposedly hired for some minor home renovations that never seemed to materialize. Dylan, I need you to know something, Malcolm said as they pulled into their driveway. What happened tonight changed everything. Your mother hurt you, and my parents defended her over you. That's unforgivable. What are you going to do? Malcolm looked at the house he'd designed himself, the life he'd built with his own hands. I'm going to make sure justice is served. But I need you to trust me and follow my lead, no matter what happens. Can you do that? Dylan nodded, though Malcolm could see the uncertainty in his son's eyes. That was fine. Dylan didn't need to understand the plan. He just needed to survive it. As they entered the house, Malcolm noticed Cassandra had cleaned up the blood and was nowhere to be seen. His parents had apparently left. The house felt different now, like a stage set waiting for the final act. Malcolm helped Dylan to his room, then retreated to his home office. He had work to do, plans to make, and a very careful game to begin. He'd spent his career designing structures that could withstand any storm. Now it was time to design the perfect destruction. Chapter 3: Blueprints for Betrayal. Malcolm spent the next week conducting his own surveillance operation with the precision of a military campaign. His architectural firm, Hicks Design Group, had been his passion project for 15 years, a boutique company that specialized in high-end residential and commercial properties. The success had afforded him resources most people could only dream of, and now he intended to use every one of them. He hired a private investigator named Jamal Ponce, a former police detective who specialized in matrimonial cases. Within 48 hours, Jamal had confirmed what Malcolm already knew. Cassandra was having an affair with Wesley Lucas, a general contractor who worked on many of the homes Malcolm designed. How long? Malcolm asked as Jamal spread photographs across his office desk. Best I can tell, about 8 months. Maybe longer. Jamal pointed to a series of photos showing Cassandra and Wesley entering and leaving various hotels around Denver. They're not particularly careful about it. Seems like they think you're oblivious. Malcolm studied the images with the same intensity he brought to architectural plans. Wesley Lucas was younger than him by about 10 years, with the kind of rugged good looks that attracted women who were bored with their stable, successful husbands. But there was something else in the photos, a casualness that suggested this wasn't just physical. They looked comfortable together, like a couple planning a future. There's more, Jamal said, producing another folder. I did some digging into Lucas's background. Guy's got a pattern. This is his third married woman in 5 years. He targets wives of successful men, gets them emotionally invested, then what? Then he usually disappears with whatever he can get. Money, jewelry, sometimes information he can use against the husband's business. Jamal paused. But this time feels different. He's been with your wife longer than the others. I think they're planning something permanent. Malcolm absorbed this information like a computer processing data. So Cassandra wasn't just cheating, she was planning to leave. Probably thought she'd get half of everything he'd built. Maybe more if she played her cards right. She'd always been smart about money, always knew exactly what he was worth. I need everything, Malcolm said. Every meeting, every phone call, every place they go. Financial records if you can get them legally. I want to know what they're planning before they know it themselves. Over the following days, Malcolm's investigation expanded. He discovered that Cassandra had been slowly moving money from their joint accounts into a personal account he didn't know existed. Small amounts at first, then larger sums disguised as household expenses, spa treatments, and shopping trips. In total, she diverted nearly $200,000 over the past 6 months. But the real revelation came when Malcolm traced Wesley Lucas's business dealings. The man was leveraging his relationship with Cassandra to bid on contracts for properties Malcolm had designed. Wesley had inside information about budgets, timelines, and competitor weaknesses. Information he could only have gotten from Cassandra, who had access to Malcolm's home office and occasionally overheard client meetings. They weren't just having an affair. They were stealing from him, using his own wife as a corporate spy. Malcolm sat in his office late one night, surrounded by evidence of their betrayal, and felt the last vestiges of his old life slip away. The man who had built a business on trust and integrity no longer existed. In his place was someone who understood that mercy was a luxury he could no longer afford. His phone buzzed with a text from Dylan. "Dad, she's not here again. Third night this week." Malcolm replied, "I know. Stay in your room and lock the door. This ends soon." He pulled out a fresh legal pad and began sketching. Not a building this time, but something far more intricate. A plan that would systematically dismantle everything Cassandra and Wesley thought they were building, while ensuring they could never threaten him or Dylan again. Malcolm had always believed in the principle that a structure was only as strong as its foundation. Cassandra and Wesley had built their affair on lies, theft, and betrayal. He was about to show them what happened when someone with superior engineering skills decided to bring the whole thing crashing down. Chapter 4: Foundation Cracks. Malcolm's plan began with precision engineering. He spent the next 2 weeks appearing to be the oblivious husband while systematically documenting every aspect of Cassandra and Wesley's operation. He installed hidden cameras in his home office, ostensibly for security, but actually to record Cassandra photographing his confidential files. He hired forensic accountants to trace the money trail and cybersecurity experts to monitor her digital communications legally. But Malcolm's real masterstroke was architectural. He'd been commissioned to design a luxury resort in Aspen, a $50 million project that would cement his reputation as one of Colorado's premier architects. The project required a general contractor, and Malcolm made sure Wesley Lucas's company was invited to bid. "Sweetheart," Malcolm said over breakfast, watching Cassandra scroll through her phone, "I'm meeting with contractors today for the Aspen project. It's going to be the biggest deal of my career." Cassandra looked up with feigned interest. "That's wonderful, darling. Anyone I might know?" "Actually, yes. Wesley Lucas is bidding. Didn't you say you were thinking of hiring him for some work around here?" Malcolm watched Cassandra's face carefully. The slight flush, the way her fingers tightened on her phone. She was excited, probably already planning to text Wesley with whatever information she could gather. "Oh yes, Wesley. He seems very capable." "I'm sure he is," Malcolm said, his tone neutral. "The meeting's at 2. I'll be in my office preparing." That afternoon, Malcolm met with 5 contractors, including Wesley. The man was exactly what Malcolm had expected: confident, charismatic, and completely unaware that he was walking into a trap. Wesley's bid was competitive, well-researched, and clearly informed by inside knowledge of Malcolm's preferences and the client's budget constraints. "Impressive work," Malcolm told Wesley as the meeting concluded. "Your understanding of the project specifics is remarkable." Wesley smiled. "I do my homework, Mr. Hicks. When you're working with the best architect in Denver, you can't afford to be unprepared." After Wesley left, Malcolm reviewed the bids with his project manager, Lloyd Santos, who'd been with the firm for 8 years and had noticed discrepancies in recent contractor proposals. "Wesley's bid is almost too good," Lloyd observed, like he knew exactly what numbers to hit. "Interesting observation," Malcolm said. "What would you say if I told you someone's been feeding our competitors inside information?" Lloyd's expression darkened. "I'd say we have a serious problem, and I want to know who." Malcolm had been carefully cultivating Lloyd's loyalty, sharing concerns about security breaches and competitor intelligence. Lloyd was honest, hardworking, and had a strong sense of professional ethics. Exactly the kind of ally Malcolm needed for what came next. "I'm going to tell you something in confidence," Malcolm said. "We have a leak. Someone with access to this office has been selling information to Wesley Lucas and possibly others." "Who?" Malcolm paused, letting the weight of revelation settle. "My wife." Lloyd's shock was genuine. "Jesus, Malcolm. Are you sure?" "Completely. I have evidence, financial records, photos, digital communications. She's been working with Lucas for months, maybe longer." "What are you going to do?" "I'm going to give them exactly what they think they want," Malcolm said. "And then I'm going to destroy them both." That evening, Malcolm found Cassandra in their bedroom, getting dressed for another of her mysterious dinner with girlfriends meetings. "How did the contractor meetings go?" she asked, applying lipstick with practiced precision. "Very well. I think I know who I'm going to choose for the Aspen project." Cassandra turned, trying to appear casual. "Oh, who?" "Wesley Lucas. His bid was exactly what I was looking for. Almost like he read my mind." Malcolm watched his wife's reflection in the mirror. The satisfaction in her eyes was unmistakable. "That's wonderful," she said. "I'm sure he'll do excellent work." "I'm sure he will," Malcolm agreed. "In fact, I'm thinking of giving him even more projects. The man clearly understands how to work with me." After Cassandra left for her dinner, Malcolm retrieved a secure phone he'd purchased for this operation and made a call to a contact from his college days, a man who'd gone into corporate investigation and had connections Malcolm preferred not to think about too closely. "I need a favor," Malcolm said when Rich Spears answered, "and I need it to be completely untraceable." "What kind of favor?" "The kind that ruins two people's lives without leaving fingerprints." Rich was quiet for a moment. "Malcolm, we've known each other for 20 years. You're not this guy." "I wasn't," Malcolm said. "But circumstances change. These people hurt my son and stole from me. They think they're clever, but they have no idea who they're dealing with." "What do you need?" Malcolm smiled. The old Malcolm might have hesitated. The new one had already calculated the cost and decided it was acceptable. "I need them to disappear. Not permanently," he clarified, "but I need them gone, discredited, and unable to hurt anyone else the way they've hurt me." Chapter 5. Structural Engineering. 2 weeks later, Malcolm's trap was perfectly positioned. He'd awarded the Aspen contract to Wesley Lucas, along with a $2 million advance payment that was standard for projects of this magnitude. Wesley thought he'd won the lottery, a career-defining project that would establish his company as a major player in luxury construction. What Wesley didn't know was that Malcolm had structured the contract with specific performance milestones tied to the advance payment. Miss any deadline, fail any inspection, or violate any term of the agreement, and Wesley would owe immediate repayment of the full advance plus penalties that would bankrupt his company. The contract was legally bulletproof, crafted by Malcolm's attorney with the precision of a Swiss timepiece. Wesley had signed eagerly, probably thinking his inside information would help him navigate any challenges. Meanwhile, Malcolm had been feeding Cassandra carefully crafted false information about his business dealings, his financial situation, and his future plans. She'd been passing it all along to Wesley, who was making decisions based on completely fabricated intelligence. "The beauty of this plan," Malcolm explained to Lloyd as they reviewed the project timeline, "is that I don't have to sabotage anything. Wesley will destroy himself trying to meet impossible expectations based on false information." Lloyd shook his head admiringly. "You've basically turned his advantage into a weapon against him." "It gets better," Malcolm said. "I've discovered that Wesley's been using similar tactics with other clients. He's essentially running a conspiracy with multiple married women, stealing business intelligence and money. When this falls apart, it's going to take down a lot more than just him and Cassandra." Malcolm's investigation had uncovered a network of infidelity and corporate espionage that reached into several of Denver's most prominent families. Wesley had been targeting wives of successful businessmen for years, using them to gain competitive advantages in bidding wars, stock trades, and real estate deals. But Malcolm's most devastating discovery was that Wesley had been recording his encounters with these women, not just for blackmail, though that was certainly part of it, but as trophies. He had video evidence of affairs involving the wives of a city councilman, two prominent attorneys, and the CEO of Denver's largest construction company. He keeps them on encrypted drives, Rich Spears had reported. Guy's got a whole collection. Your wife is just his latest conquest. Malcolm felt a cold fury at this revelation. Cassandra wasn't just cheating. She was being used by a predator who collected married women like some men collected vintage cars. The knowledge that she'd allowed herself to be manipulated so thoroughly would have been pathetic if it weren't so dangerous to his family. That evening, Malcolm set the next phase of his plan in motion. He called Cassandra into his office, where she found him reviewing construction documents with what appeared to be serious concern. "Is everything all right?" she asked, though Malcolm could see her eyes already scanning for information she could pass along. "Problem with the Aspen project," Malcolm said, making sure to sound worried. "The geological survey came back with some issues. The foundation requirements are going to be much more extensive than originally planned." This was completely false. The geological survey had been perfect, which was why Malcolm had chosen the site in the first place. But Cassandra wouldn't know that. What does that mean? It means cost overruns. Significant ones. The project budget is going to increase by at least 30%, maybe more. And all of that is going to come out of the contractor's margin. Malcolm watched Cassandra absorb this information with growing excitement disguised as concern. "That's terrible," she said. "What will you do?" "I'll have to renegotiate with Wesley. Give him a chance to adjust his bid or withdraw from the project entirely. It's only fair." That night, Malcolm monitored Cassandra's communications and watched her immediately contact Wesley with the false information. Within hours, Wesley had submitted a revised proposal that was exactly the kind of desperate overreach Malcolm had been counting on. The new bid included corners cut on materials, compressed timelines that were physically impossible to meet, and cost estimates that ignored basic engineering realities. Wesley was trying to maintain his profit margins while accounting for the fictional cost overruns Cassandra had warned him about. Malcolm smiled as he reviewed the proposal. Wesley had just handed him everything he needed to destroy the man's reputation and trigger the contract penalties that would bankrupt his company. But this was only the beginning. The architectural plans Malcolm was designing for their destruction were far more complex than anything Wesley could imagine. Chapter 6: Load-Bearing Failures. The first sign of Wesley's downfall came 3 weeks into the Aspen project. Malcolm had arranged for surprise inspections by city officials, building code experts, and environmental specialists, all perfectly legal and standard for a project of this magnitude. But time to occur when Wesley was trying to execute his corner-cutting strategy. The inspection reports were devastating. Substandard materials, improper techniques, and clear violations of the building specifications Malcolm had provided. Each failure triggered penalty clauses in the contract, racking up fines that quickly consumed Wesley's profit margin and began eating into the principal. Malcolm watched from his office as Wesley's phone calls grew increasingly frantic. The man was calling suppliers, trying to source better materials to replace the cheap alternatives he'd originally ordered. He was bringing in additional crews to accelerate the timeline, burning through cash reserves at an alarming rate. "He's panicking," Lloyd observed, reviewing the daily reports from the construction site, "making emotional decisions instead of strategic ones." "That's exactly what I want," Malcolm said. "Panic leads to mistakes, and mistakes in construction can be catastrophic." But the professional destruction was only half of Malcolm's plan. The personal side was far more intricate. Malcolm had been working with Rich Spears to gather evidence of Wesley's broader criminal enterprise, the network of affairs and corporate espionage that extended far beyond Cassandra. They now had documentation of securities fraud, insider trading, and extortion involving dozens of victims across Colorado. More importantly, they'd located Wesley's collection of recordings. The encrypted drives contained evidence that would destroy multiple marriages and bring down some of Denver's most powerful men, which was exactly why Malcolm needed to control them. "We can't just turn this over to the police," Rich warned during one of their clandestine meetings. "There are too many important people involved." This kind of information could destabilize half the city's power structure. I'm not interested in destabilizing anything, Malcolm said. I'm interested in ensuring that Wesley Lucas and my wife never have the ability to hurt anyone again. Malcolm's plan was elegantly simple. He would use Wesley's own criminal evidence against him, but selectively. The recordings involving other men's wives would disappear forever, protecting innocent families from destruction. But the evidence of Wesley's crimes would be preserved and delivered to the appropriate authorities at precisely the right moment. As for Cassandra, her fate would be tied directly to Wesley's. Malcolm had traced their financial arrangements and discovered that she'd been receiving regular payments from Wesley's company, ostensibly for consulting services, but actually payment for the intelligence she provided. This made her legally complicit in Wesley's fraud and potentially liable for criminal charges. The beauty of Malcolm's approach was that he didn't need to fabricate evidence or commit crimes himself. Wesley and Cassandra had been building their own prison for months. Malcolm was simply ensuring they'd be locked inside it. The climax came when Wesley, desperate to salvage the Aspen Project, attempted to blackmail Malcolm using some of the recorded evidence he'd gathered about other clients. Wesley apparently thought he could leverage Malcolm's relationships with mutual contacts to renegotiate the contract terms. The phone call came on a Tuesday evening while Malcolm was having dinner with Dylan. "Mr. Hicks, we need to talk," Wesley said, his voice carrying a threatening edge Malcolm found almost amusing. "About what, Mr. Lucas?" "About how we're going to restructure our arrangement. I think you'll find I have some information that makes our partnership more valuable than you initially realized." Malcolm put the call on speaker so Dylan could hear. He wanted his son to understand exactly what kind of man his mother had chosen over their family. "I'm not sure what you mean," Malcolm said evenly. "I think you are. I have recordings, Mr. Hicks. Conversations involving some very important people in this city. People who value their privacy and would be grateful to someone who protected it. The threat was clear. Pay up or Wesley would release evidence that would destroy innocent families." Malcolm smiled. Wesley had just confessed to extortion on a recorded line. "Mr. Lucas," Malcolm said, his voice carrying the cold authority that had made him successful in business, "I think you misunderstand our relationship. You're an employee who has failed to meet the terms of his contract. Nothing more, nothing less." "We'll see about that," Wesley said, then hung up. Malcolm looked at Dylan, who was staring at the phone with a mixture of shock and disgust. "Dad," Dylan said quietly, "what kind of person did Mom get involved with?" "The worst kind," Malcolm replied. "But don't worry. He's about to learn what happens when you threaten a Hicks." That night, Malcolm made a call to the FBI's white-collar crime division. He had a tip about a major fraud and extortion operation, and he was ready to provide evidence. Chapter 7, Demolition Day. FBI Special Agent Marcy Zimmerman arrived at Malcolm's office on a cold Thursday morning in November, accompanied by a cybercrime specialist and a prosecutor from the district attorney's office. Malcolm had been preparing for this meeting for weeks, assembling evidence with a meticulous attention to detail that had made him one of Denver's most sought-after architects. "Mr. Hicks," Agent Zimmerman began, "you've made some serious allegations. Before we proceed, I need to understand your involvement in this situation." Malcolm had anticipated this question. "Agent Zimmerman, I'm a victim. My wife has been stealing proprietary business information and selling it to Wesley Lucas, who's been using it to defraud multiple clients and competitors. When I discovered the scheme, I began documenting everything to protect myself and my business." He handed over 3 thick folders containing financial records, communications intercepts, and photographic evidence. The cybercrimes specialist, Neil Hubbard, began reviewing the digital evidence on his laptop. "This is extensive," Hubbard said after several minutes. "Mr. Hicks, how did you obtain some of these communications?" "I hired a private investigator and used legal surveillance methods on my own property," Malcolm replied. "Everything was gathered in accordance with Colorado law." This was technically true, though Malcolm had been very selective about which evidence to present. The FBI would see Wesley's crimes clearly, but they wouldn't see the full scope of Malcolm's own investigation or the methods Rich Spears had used to obtain some of the more sensitive information. Agent Zimmerman studied the construction contract that had started the Aspen project. "This is a sophisticated trap," she observed. "You designed this contract specifically to expose Lucas's criminal behavior." "I designed it to protect my interests," Malcolm corrected. Mr. Lucas chose to respond with fraud and extortion. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Viola Fuentes, looked up from the financial records. "Mr. Hicks, your wife is deeply implicated in this conspiracy. Are you prepared for the legal consequences she'll face?" Malcolm's expression didn't change. "My wife made her choices. I'm here to ensure justice is served, regardless of personal consequences." What Malcolm didn't tell them was that he'd already filed for divorce and had moved Dylan's and his assets into protected trusts. Cassandra would face criminal charges with no financial resources and no family support. Malcolm's parents, who had been so quick to defend her after she stabbed Dylan, were about to learn exactly how thoroughly they'd backed the wrong horse. 3 hours later, the FBI had everything they needed to begin arrests. Wesley Lucas was taken into custody at the Aspen construction site, in full view of his employees and subcontractors. The charges included securities fraud, wire fraud, extortion, and racketeering, enough to put him away for 20 years if convicted. Cassandra was arrested at home while Malcolm and Dylan watched from across the street. Malcolm had sent Dylan to stay with his aunt for the week, not wanting the boy to be present for the arrest, but Dylan had insisted on witnessing this moment. "How do you feel?" Dylan asked as they watched his mother being led away in handcuffs. "Free," Malcolm said simply. But the arrests were only the beginning of Malcolm's plan. Over the next several days, the full scope of Wesley's criminal network began to unravel. The FBI discovered the encrypted drives containing recordings of dozens of affairs, along with evidence of insider trading, business fraud, and extortion stretching back 5 years. Malcolm had made sure that the evidence would expose Wesley's crimes while protecting the innocent families who had been victimized. The recordings involving other wives were mysteriously corrupted beyond recovery, while the evidence of Wesley's crimes remained pristine. The FBI assumed this was the result of Wesley's clumsy attempts to destroy evidence, never suspecting Malcolm's careful curation. The media coverage was devastating for both Wesley and Cassandra. Local news outlets painted them as predators who had targeted successful families and attempted to destroy them from within. Cassandra's behavior toward Dylan, particularly the stabbing incident, which was now part of the court record, made her especially unsympathetic to public opinion. Malcolm's business, meanwhile, experienced an unexpected surge in demand. Clients saw him as a victim who had handled a terrible situation with dignity and strength. The Aspen project, once Wesley's contract were terminated, attracted the attention of major construction companies eager to work with the architect who had exposed such a significant criminal conspiracy. But Malcolm's most satisfying victory was personal. His parents, Robert and May Hicks, who had defended Cassandra and dismissed Dylan's injuries, now found themselves on the wrong side of public opinion and family loyalty. When they called Malcolm seeking reconciliation, he delivered a message they would never forget. "You chose to protect the woman who stabbed your grandson," Malcolm told them during a brief phone conversation. "You chose her over your own family. Live with that choice, but live with it somewhere else. You're no longer welcome in our lives." Dylan, listening from across the room, nodded his approval. The boy had learned hard lessons about loyalty and betrayal, but he'd also learned that his father would protect him regardless of the cost. Chapter 8. Final Inspection. The trial began 6 months later, in the spring of Malcolm's new life. Wesley Lucas faced federal charges that would likely result in a sentence of 15 to 20 years in federal prison. Cassandra, as part of a plea agreement, had cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced sentence of 5 to 7 years. Malcolm testified as the primary victim, describing how his wife and her lover had systematically stolen from his business and attempted to destroy his reputation. His testimony was calm, factual, and devastating. The jury saw him as a successful man who had been betrayed by the people closest to him, but had responded with dignity and respect for the law. What the jury didn't see was the extent of Malcolm's behind-the-scenes orchestration. They didn't know about Rich Spears or the carefully managed evidence or the way Malcolm had manipulated Wesley into destroying himself. As far as anyone could prove, Malcolm had simply documented crimes that were being committed against him and reported them to authorities. During cross-examination, Wesley's defense attorney tried to paint Malcolm as a vindictive husband who had orchestrated an elaborate revenge scheme. "Mr. Hicks," the attorney said, "isn't it true that you designed this entire situation to destroy Mr. Lucas and your wife?" Malcolm's response was measured and precise. "I designed a lawful contract to protect my business interests." Mr. Lucas chose to respond with criminal behavior. "I documented that behavior and reported it to the FBI. If that's revenge, then every crime victim who seeks justice is guilty of the same thing." The attorney pressed further. "You hired private investigators, installed surveillance equipment, and fed false information to your wife. Doesn't that sound like entrapment to you?" "It sounds like a man protecting his family and business from criminals," Malcolm replied. "Everything I did was legal. Everything they did was not." The testimony that truly destroyed Wesley came from his other victims, the wives he had manipulated and the businesses he had defrauded over the years. Malcolm had made sure the FBI found all of them, creating a pattern of predatory behavior that made Wesley's guilt undeniable. When Cassandra took the stand as part of her plea agreement, Malcolm watched dispassionately as she attempted to portray herself as another victim of Wesley's manipulation. She claimed he had seduced her, convinced her to steal information, and threatened her when she tried to stop. Some of this was probably even true, but Malcolm knew that Cassandra had made calculated choices every step of the way. She had chosen Wesley over her family, theft over honesty, and greed over love. The consequences she now faced were the direct result of those choices. During a recess, Cassandra's attorney approached Malcolm about the possibility of reconciliation after her sentence was served. "Mr. Hicks," the attorney said, "my client would like you to know that she's deeply sorry for what she's done. She's hoping that when she's paid her debt to society, there might be a chance for your family to heal." Malcolm's response was delivered with the same cold precision he brought to architectural specifications. "Your client is a criminal who attacked my son with a deadly weapon and stole from my business. When her sentence is complete, she'll be free to build whatever life she can manage. But she'll do it without any connection to me or my son. That door is permanently closed." The verdict came after 3 days of deliberation. Wesley Lucas was found guilty on all counts. Cassandra's cooperation had earned her a shorter sentence, but she would still spend the next 5 years in federal prison. As Malcolm left the courthouse with Dylan, now 18 and preparing for college, he felt a satisfaction that was both profound and complete. Justice had been served, but more importantly, the people who had betrayed his family would never have the opportunity to hurt anyone again. "Dad," Dylan said as they walked to their car, "do you ever regret any of it?" Malcolm considered the question. Did he regret the complexity of his plan, the months of careful manipulation, the way he had systematically destroyed 2 people's lives? "No," he said finally. "Some people think forgiveness is a virtue, but forgiveness without justice is just weakness. Your mother and Wesley chose to be predators. I chose to make sure they face consequences." Chapter 9. New Construction. 2 years after the trial, Malcolm stood in his newly redesigned office, reviewing plans for what would be his most ambitious project yet, a children's hospital that would serve the entire Rocky Mountain region. Dylan was now in his sophomore year at MIT, studying engineering and following in his father's footsteps. They spoke every week, their relationship stronger than it had ever been. The stabbing incident that had started everything was now just a faint scar on Dylan's shoulder, but it had taught both father and son lessons about loyalty, justice, and the price of betrayal that they would carry for the rest of their lives. Malcolm's business had grown exponentially in the years since the trial. Clients valued his reputation for integrity and his ability to handle complex, sensitive situations with discretion. Several of the families who had been victimized by Wesley's network had become major clients, drawn to an architect who understood the importance of protecting what you'd built. Rich Spears still occasionally provided security consulting for Malcolm's firm, though their relationship had evolved into something more straightforward. The shadow world of surveillance and manipulation was behind them. Malcolm had found more satisfaction in building than in destroying. The one area where Malcolm had shown no compromise was with his parents. Robert and May Hicks had attempted multiple reconciliations over the years, sending letters, showing up at Dylan's high school graduation, even hiring a family counselor to mediate. Malcolm had ignored them all. They had chosen to defend the woman who attacked their grandson, and Malcolm believed that some betrayals were simply unforgivable. "Don't you think you're being too harsh?" Lloyd Santos had asked during one of their project meetings. Lloyd had become Malcolm's closest friend and business partner, and one of the few people who knew the full scope of what had happened during the trial. "Lloyd," Malcolm had replied, "I've learned that people reveal their true nature during crises. My parents showed me exactly who they are and what they value. That information is useful, but it doesn't create an obligation for me to maintain a relationship with them." As for Cassandra, she had been released from federal prison after serving 4 years of her sentence. Malcolm had heard through mutual acquaintances that she was working as a cashier at a grocery store in a small town outside Denver, living in a studio apartment and struggling to rebuild any kind of life. Wesley Lucas still had 8 years remaining on his sentence and would likely face additional charges when he was released. Malcolm felt no sympathy for either of them. They had made calculated decisions to betray the people who trusted them, and they had faced the logical consequences of those decisions. The fact that the consequences had been severe was a reflection of the severity of their crimes, not any particular cruelty on Malcolm's part. On a Friday evening in late autumn, Malcolm was working late in his office when Dylan called from Boston. "Dad, I've been thinking about something," Dylan said. "Do you ever wonder what would have happened if you'd handled things differently? If you just divorced Mom and moved on?" Malcolm leaned back in his chair, looking out at the Denver skyline he'd helped shape with his designs. "Do you mean would I have been happier if I'd just accepted what they did and tried to move past it? Something like that." "Dylan, your mother didn't just cheat on me. She stole from me, she endangered you, and she was part of a criminal conspiracy that hurt a lot of innocent people. If I just divorced her and let Wesley continue his operation, how many other families would have been destroyed? So you think you did the right thing?" Malcolm considered this carefully. He'd built his plan on the foundation of justice, but he'd also built it on anger, betrayal, and a desire for revenge that he'd never fully acknowledged to anyone, including himself. "I think I did the necessary thing," he said finally. "Sometimes that's the same as the right thing, and sometimes it isn't. But I can live with the consequences of my choices, which is more than I can say for the people who betrayed us." After hanging up, Malcolm walked to the window and looked out at the city lights. He'd spent 2 years building a new life on the ruins of his old one, and he was genuinely happy in a way he hadn't been for years before Cassandra's betrayal. But he also knew that the man who had orchestrated Wesley and Cassandra's destruction was still inside him, waiting patiently in case anyone else ever decided to test the boundaries of his loyalty or threaten the people he loved. Malcolm Hicks had learned that forgiveness was a luxury he couldn't afford. Justice, on the other hand, was a foundation upon which you could build anything. He returned to his desk and began reviewing plans for the Children's Hospital. It would be his greatest achievement, a building that would save lives and serve the community for generations. It would be built on honesty, integrity, and the absolute certainty that some things